and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have one of two shows that we're putting out this week, and this guest is Bryce Zabel. I'm going to be talking about him in just a minute. These are face-to-face interviews that I did at the UFO Congress. Now, if you go to our website, podcastufo.com, you'll see that as one show with him and Bill Burns. I decided to separate these two on YouTube because one person that may want to hear Bryce Zabel may not want to hear Bill Burns talk about Tesla. So they are two separate shows. And anyway, Bryce Zabel is such an amazing and brilliant talent. If you look at his Internet Movie Database page or his Wikipedia page, it'll make your head spin. And that's not everything he's done. He's decided to remove some things not to confuse people. So he's seems like a very busy guy. And he's going to be talking about that, UFOs, Betty and Barney Hill, and a lot more. So I hope you enjoy the show. And remember, you can support us for $2 or more a month. And that information's right down in the text below. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. Bryce, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And I listened to you on Alejandro Rojas's show. We help each other out. Really was very impressed. It was great.
Well, thank you for saying that. And Alejandro makes it pretty easy. He's one of the world's great interviewers, and he's a good friend as well, so it's always fun to do that.
That's right. He said he's known you for many years. I remember him saying that.
That's true, although, like with many friendships, at first it's a professional thing, and you know each other, and then you see each other enough times in enough situations, and then one day you turn around and you go, I guess we are friends. We're good friends.
We have to be at this point. We haven't stepped on each
other.
But
I do love the guy. He's fantastic.
He is. He's got such a good heart.
Terrific.
Yeah. Can you tell the listening audience who's not familiar with you, you have an amazing background. I mean, you've done all sorts of things.
I've done so many things that my agents used to say, take that stuff off your resume. Makes you look old. Don't do that. Okay, here's the short version. Yeah. I started out in television news. I came to Los Angeles as a CNN correspondent, and that was a terrific gig. I was the original hard news correspondent in L.A., and worked as an investigative reporter in L.A., that kind of thing. And then at a certain point, I realized in order to stay in TV news, I would probably end up having to sort of become a news nomad. I might be anchoring in Baltimore or Buffalo or whatever right now. And my wife, Jackie, said, have you ever thought of writing a screenplay? And at the time I said, I've never even seen a screenplay. I don't know what it looks like. So we literally went down to Hollywood Boulevard and bought a screenplay. I took it home and I said, this looks like I could do it because there aren't that many adjectives and adverbs in it. It's pretty simple. So I ended up writing something that was, they always say, write what you know. So I wrote ENG, which was electronic news gathering. It was kind of a Hill Street News project. And guess what? Somebody bought it, the Canadians. They made 108 episodes of it. The next thing I wrote became a television series on CBS. And I said to myself, as long as they keep paying me to do this, I'm going to keep doing this. Yeah. And over the years, they've kept paying me to do it. So now, flash forward today, I look back on a career where I've been lucky enough to have received the creative buy on 5 television series, and that's really something I'm very proud of. Shows Fantastic. That not often shows, these days people don't see everything. It's not like when there were 3 channels, everybody saw everything, so I don't expect anybody to know most of these credits, but I worked on Lois and Clark, I worked on Life Goes On, I created or developed the Mantis TV series, which was the first African-American superhero on television. Created Dark Skies for NBC, which we may talk about later, and did a number of shows like that. During that time, I also got elected to be chairman of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the place that gives out the Emmys. Amazing. And guess what? I got elected the month before 9/11 and had just taken office and had to lead the Academy in canceling the Emmys twice that year. They'd gone 49 years, never canceled. We did it twice. So it got a little intense. These days, I've still got a television presence, but my big thing is features. I have a big World War II true story that should be out in 2019 called The Last Battle, about the last battle of World War II in Europe. Documentary? No, it's a big drama. It's a feature, action feature, and it's terrific. I mean, it's a terrific. If we have time, I'll tell you the story about that. And also in the world of UFOs, which are certainly important on your show, and I want to talk about that. I have 2 features that are in development right now that are really interesting. One of them is Captured, the story of Betty and Barney Hill.
Really?
And the other is Unidentified, the story of Stan Friedman and Don Schmidt racing to break the Roswell story. And I'm out of breath.
That's amazing. Wow. I had no idea. I thought I heard Kathy Martin say something about a film, and it must have been yours.
That's the one. It's going to be a terrific film when and if we get it made. It's hard to make anything,
Yeah.
Very
costly.
The World War II movie, The Last Battle, that's going to be made has only taken me 14 years.
Oh,
so,
wow.
So I mean, and of course, when it comes out, I'll be an overnight success with a big film. But that's the way the Hollywood works.
I think I remember. I know Betty was still alive when the other film came out. She didn't like the person who portrayed her, which I thought that was a good actress. I can't remember her name. But do you know if they were happy with how that film came out? I don't know if I ever had that conversation.
Well, let's set the table for that.
Yeah.
There was one film made in 1975 called The Interrupted. It was based on the book The Interrupted Journey, but it was called on NBC. It was a movie of the week, The UFO Incident. I am not redoing that. I'm not remaking that movie. That's just the movie that was made, and it was. I can't remember the name of the actress right now, but I do know that James Earl Jones played Barney.
Yes.
It's not a good film. In retrospect, you look at it, the aliens are in little plastic costumes, and it's not frightening, and it's definitely not the way we would choose to tell that story today. So I've always been passionate about that story. On the Dark Skies series, I actually did a Betty and Barney Hill sequence that I'm really proud of. It's a clip I have on YouTube right now, but it stoked the fires for me. So that when Stanton Friedman and Kathy Martin wrote the book, Captured, I immediately wanted to option it because I thought that would be new material to base something on, and I could make a modern movie about Betty and Barney Hill. And I think probably many of your listeners know the story, but just in short, what's brilliant about the Betty and Barney Hill case is it happened in 1961. These are the first people in the United States to publicly claim that they were abducted by aliens. They were interracial. Barney was black, Betty was white. They're the first couple ever to be hypnotized to find out what happened to them. What I particularly love about it, because you can't just sell an outright UFO true story these days, or maybe you can. I'd be happy to try, but this one has a hook, which is Betty and Barney Hill being interracial. We're an interracial couple at a time when that was a very big deal in America.
Yes. And
the only people who seemed not to care about their color of their skin were the aliens, who treated them the same. And to me, that's kind of an interesting thing. And also, Captured is set in the time frame of the early 60s where, let's face it, the Cold War was in full flame. And they lived very close to Peace Air Force Base, which was America's tip of the spear in the nuclear bomber business. So you have to take all of that into context and say, did the Cold War, did nuclear weapons, did any of this play a part in their kidnapping, or was it literally just they got plucked out of the White Mountains and taken aboard a spacecraft?
Yeah, I grew up in that area, actually.
Oh, you did?
About 6 miles away from Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
You know, my wife, Jackie, and I literally went to New Hampshire last year, and we went up to the site and looked around, and isn't that developed now, but it was really not that developed at all back then.
Yeah.
And to be driving home through the mountains in the dark back in 1961 would have to be frightening on its own. And then to have strange lights following you, and then craft land in front of you, and then experience the first missing time that anybody ever claimed to have experienced. It's a powerful story, and I very much look forward to making it.
Wow. I had, I guess you call him a so-called debunker or a skeptic of the Betty and Barney Hill story on. I let people, say their thing. So he was on, and basically what he was saying didn't hold water. And actually, Kathy called in. Also, Lee Spiegel called in, and he said, well, what about the Project Blue Book file that I actually held in my hand that said things were going on? You know, P's got radar on it, you know, and I think there was another radar. You know, there's a lot that, you know, I can understand. There's a couple things that I can understand why a skeptic would say, because I have seen, you know, one of the things is the light on Cannon Mountain. I don't know if you ever heard that.
Right.
And
I've heard it all.
Kind of
at
follows
this point.
you
Yeah,
along,
you
you know,
bet.
that type of thing. I have seen actually where lights on a mountain do seem like they're following you, but still, there was just so many other parts to this thing that.
Well, there is certainly a substantial amount of corroborating evidence, and I think it has led most people to say, if there is a great case for alien abduction, this might be one of them. But again, if you're telling it as a film story, and it's not a documentary, all right, and it's not the book. If you want to know the details, read Stan and Kathy's book. If I felt like my mission was to educate people only, I would make a documentary. I'm making it an entertainment product that happens to be based on a true story. So for me, it still remains a mystery as this film begins, because there are other options. There are other things that can induce people to report certain things. And let's face it, the Russians could have been flying around out there, penetrating defenses near Peace Air Force Base. They could have had an event. Maybe they were attacked by racists in the middle of the night, and it was such a terrible event they went into a fugue state. I mean, there are things that people have talked about. Or they could have been part of MK Ultra, snagged by MK Ultra, because let's face it, they were coming from Montreal. Montreal in 1961 was the home base of America's MK Ultra mind alteration location. So there's a lot of interesting other theories to weave into it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we do come to a conclusion, but I'm not telling you what that is right now.
You know what I'd love to see made into a film someday, and I don't know if you've looked into it at all, is the Allagash incident.
It would be a great film. I think the problem that I have is just that there are so many. There's so many that would be a great film. And while I have two right now captured that we've been talking about and unidentified, the Roswell film, I think I would do a disservice to either of those to cast my eye outward at this point, because what I'm trying to stay, in order to sell a film, man, you just have to be laser focused.
Sure.
And so what I'm trying to do is just keep my mind in the game, eye on the ball.
Yep.
I want to sell those two, because I think it's 2018. We're coming off the hot news of the New York Times article ricocheting around the world. And while I think Hollywood has traditionally embraced more of the alien invasion and the let's just make some stuff up and put it out there variety, I think, and I'm betting the farm on it, to be honest with you, I think it is possible that we may be pivoting, even in Hollywood, to where there might be a market for some of these true life stories, as you mentioned, the Allegation incident, and also Betty and Barney and Roswell, for these to sort of come alive in a new dramatic way, because I think people are talking about this topic in a serious way that they haven't talked about in quite a long time.
I do too, and it's not everyone that is. And what I mean by that, I know there's been over 100 news reports on major news stations, segments, I should say, on this. But I told the story the other night. I'll just tell it to you real briefly. I was on the plane next to a retired F-18 Hornet pilot. The
story starts out great already.
Yeah. He's now an American Airlines pilot, commercial pilot. And right away he said, I said to him, did you hear about the UFO and the Pentagon, secret program for UFOs? And he goes, no. Like that. So there's a lot of people that didn't hear about it. And then he goes, but then he said, but I know they're real. And he said, and I'll tell you why. He had an encounter. And, the first thing, he stopped himself. And I know I said this on the show the other night. He stopped himself and he said, you don't think I'm crazy, do you? And then when I asked him to be on my show and tell the story, it was a green orb, lit up his cockpit and everything. When I asked him if he'd be on the show, he said, absolutely not.
Oh.
And then I said, would you be on the show anonymous? He goes, I'll think about it.
That's too bad, because I honestly think that's old school thinking. New
Yep.
school thinking is we're all starting to realize this truth at approximately the same time, and it's incumbent upon those of us who have a piece of the mosaic to not only put the piece of the mosaic out there for others to judge, but to put our own names out there so that the actual reports that we're talking about can be evaluated. Anonymous sources are never the primary way to do it. When you read an anonymous source in a newspaper, it's never as good.
Falls apart.
So I don't know that he has any reason to fear. People don't seem to be knocking off witnesses who just see a UFO. So
yeah, but the airline industry is a little bit different.
it is true.
Yeah.
It is true.
The FAA, I mean, you can't. They don't even want to deal with the UFO.
Well, they don't want to
report.
deal with it, but again, is he actively a pilot now?
He was like jump seating or whatever.
Okay, well then that makes a certain amount of sense. A few years back, Richard Dolan and I co-wrote a book called AD After Disclosure.
Oh,
so
yes.
we were,
You were a co-writer
yeah, I
of that.
co-wrote that,
Oh.
of course.
Yeah.
And we were projecting what the world will be like after we all acknowledge that this is true. And one of the things we were talking about, Richard is a font of vast information. He's probably our preeminent researcher, and his mind is encyclopedic on this topic, so he's fabulous in that regard. What I tried to bring to it was to do a little of that precognition of what the future might look like. Here's one for you on the airline industry. There will be lawsuits, because once a government acknowledges in any serious way that some of these things that were flying around are real, then what about the pilots that reported a UFO that people actually knew were real, but instead those pilots were suspended because nobody would come forward to tell about it, and they were taken off flight status for 3 years? Well, their careers were damaged, they were damaged, they'll be suing somebody. I mean, that kind of thing is going to happen. So when you think about how the world's going to change after disclosure of some kind, it isn't just the things that you might think. It's the things that are going to happen are the things that are already embedded in our culture. We're litigious. We're going to sue each other over this thing, right? So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and the JAL 1625.
Yes, great example.
On a desk job.
Great example. That person has an actionable case.
Yeah. Well, I never thought of that part of it. I have said many times in the show, a number of times I've said, the government would never really admit it, or they'd have a hard time admitting it because there's so many things, that they've hidden or
they made
lied
it hard.
about.
They've certainly made it hard to admit it by virtue of the increasing length of the silence. At the beginning, say people had come clean in the mid-'50s. I think you could make an argument. Folks, we're in the middle of the Cold War, right? And we needed to get a handle on some of this before we brought you in on everything, right? So you could actually say, well, that's what I expect my government to do. They're supposed to be watching my back. But with every year, and now we're 70 years past Roswell, for example, if you come clean on that right now, and you knew about it, then that means you have been lying by omission for 70 years.
Yeah.
Well, what person in government wants to make that admission?
Yes,
and
exactly.
what citizen is going to think fondly of government that knew this and didn't tell us about it?
I think there's a lot of people not thinking fondly these days anyway.
Well, that's very true, but these are under normal times, and even in the age of Trump, we have to still put it in the category of normal times. Even though it's extreme, it's still somewhat normal that political parties are going to position themselves and fight and all that. What AD is going to do is create a less normal time. I'm not saying it's going to be devastating. It remains. Whether it's devastating or not depends on who they are, what they want, and why they're here, and whether we're safe.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answers to that, and I'm not sure the government totally knows, but they certainly have a better idea than you and I do right now, because they've got gun camera footage and they've got cases and that kind of thing. So it'll be extreme. The way I like to look at disclosure, I'm sure many people who are listening have seen Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
Okay, and the character played by George C. Scott is General Buck Turgidson, and he's making the argument for nuclear war, right? And they're saying, my God, nuclear war, that's terrible. And what does he say? I'm not saying we're not going to get our hair mussed. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're not going to get our hair mussed. When we finally acknowledge this, it's going to be a rocky time for a period of time for sure. But that doesn't cut anybody any slack for not doing it. It's time.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think the world per se is, going to change. And I don't know what you stated in that book of your guesses of what would happen financially with the stock market and all that.
Well, yeah, we did. We went into all of that. I mean, I'm very, very proud of AD After Disclosure. It's just, I think it stands up very well today. And that, as an example, we thought of all of that stuff
That
and
must
tried
have been
to
fun to do.
Oh,
that.
it was a great brain puzzle.
Yeah.
But we tried to find antecedents or precedents for things that would happen. So, for example, what happened after 9/11? What did we do with the stock market? We shut it down for a week. Okay, so I would say they'll shut the stock market down, right? Because it would fluctuate too wildly, and they'll probably shut it down for a week. During the Depression, Roosevelt declared a bank holiday. We'll probably declare a bank holiday. I mean, we will do the government that we'll start to suspect has been lying to us is still going to be the only ones around who can stabilize certain things like markets and money policy. So we're going to have to use them because they're all we've got.
Right. And as far as like unity in the world, I'm sure you heard Reagan say,
of course,
4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
That saying. Do you think that would change anything in the unity in the world, or do you think it would?
Well,
all
let's
that
face
would stay
it.
The same.
It's a good question, and smart people can disagree. But here's how I would look at it on one point of analysis. If you look at the entire world right now, certainly there are people in different countries that understand the truth or reality of what we're facing. It isn't just the United States.
Right.
There's people in Russia, there's people in China, there's people in France and Germany. There's people all over the world that understand this, and it hasn't made war stop, right? It hasn't made trade wars end. There are still issues between countries. So while it may provide us some unity, it's probably not a panacea and isn't going to solve all problems. We're not going to sing Kumbaya just because somebody says there's aliens that have been visiting us. But I would say this. We don't know a lot. We don't know what we should know. We have enough to guess. So I always try to ask myself, what is it that we can say for sure? With 70 years in on this thing, are there any things that we can say for sure? I think there are 2 things we can say. The first thing is,
I'm going to guess in my head.
Okay, you do. The first thing we can say, based on the reports of the pilots and things that you talked about, and the photos and the videos and the first-person accounts and the radar, at least some of the things that are flying around in our skies today are from someplace that isn't here, and they're being piloted by somebody that isn't us.
I more or less got it.
Right, some of that.
That one.
Okay, now number 2 is if there's one thing that we can say that we agree with the others, I'll call these others because they may not be extraterrestrial, they may be extra-dimensional or time travelers, who knows what they are, we don't really know. But if there's one thing that humans agree with the others on, it's this, that it should remain a secret. Now think about that. It's self-evident. If we didn't want it to be a secret, we could hold a news conference and we could say, by the way, that UFO stuff, yeah, man, that's all real, but we haven't done it. Nobody's done it, right? And if the others thought we should know what was going on, they literally could have landed on the White House lawn. They could have made an announcement. They could have shown themselves over every major city at the same time, or whatever it was. They could have taken over the airwaves. They could have done 1,000 things to announce their presence, but they haven't.
Right.
So we know for a fact that we agree, that our leaders anyway, agree with the others that we should keep the whole thing quiet for a while.
Yeah. The thing you said a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
The 3, I think it was 3
Three
questions.
questions, yeah.
Yeah.
Who are they? What do they want? Are we safe?
Are we safe? All those are very, very important. And I've pondered, how much does the government actually know?
Right.
What part of the government actually knows? What compartmentalized section of the government? Do they know any of those?
I think they have slightly, at the very least, they have slightly more informed answers than we do. Guesses, rather, instead of answers. I think you could argue on who are they. They have a slightly better answer than we do, in that it sounds like they've got some crash wreckage, sounds like they've had a few bodies or whatever, sounds like there's been better gun camera footage and things like that. So they have a slightly, at minimum, better idea of who they are. As to what they want, now that's the $64,000 question, because you and I aren't talking to any aliens, right? So then it's only anecdotal, which leads you to question 3, are we safe? Which is, frankly, the big one. The only reason to justify secrecy would be the sense that we're not safe and they're trying to get a handle on it.
Yeah.
And people disagree. You do have giant groups that believe they're kind of cosmic space brothers communing with us and all that. Maybe. But then you also have people who say, like, David Jacobs has said, this thing has a whole nasty edge to it. So, and maybe it's both. One thing we know, and I've never tried to quote this person because I've seen the quote attributed to 3 different people, but it's a physicist who said, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. Yeah. Now, if you take that to heart and apply it to the UFO thing, that is one possibility for why this is such a vexing secret that has plagued society for so long. And it may be that a collection of reasonably good people over time have made the decision to try to keep it bundled up while they work on it. That's possible. That's the nicest interpretation. Another interpretation is simply that some people like Stephen Greer would like us to believe it's because they have energy, so it's going to create new energy sources, and that's why they don't want to talk about it. Maybe. But I think the other reason would be we can't stop them from doing what they're doing, right. And we suspect their agenda isn't particularly pro-humanity, and who would want to make that announcement?
Right. I also think that if the government didn't know if they were safe or not safe, it would still be the same problem.
Yeah.
The mystery of
right.
it, whether they are safe or not.
But, here's the thing. When I was chairman of the TV Academy, we had a saying, all of us together are smarter than any one of us. So we applied that to the canceling of the Emmys, right? It could have been my decision as the chairman. I could just say, we're canceling the Emmys, but that doesn't seem right. You need a buy-in, right? You need other people to say, I'm with you on this, because leadership is about bringing the team together. So I think even if there were solid reasons for secrecy at the beginning, that period of time seems to have passed. If this is indeed one of these vexing questions that is almost insoluble to us, to our brains right now, then that means that a relatively small group of men and women are involved in it, because most of us don't know what's going on, right? I think whether it's good or bad or indifferent, it's not going to hurt us to bring everybody in on it to work the problem. If it's a problem, I'd rather be a part of it. When we had to defeat the Nazis in World War II, we didn't tell the citizens, we want you to work on building all this stuff, but we're not going to tell you. No, we reported the war. We kept certain key secrets to win the battle. I'm not saying disclosure means there are no secrets whatsoever anymore about anything, but it is sort of time to acknowledge some form of this reality so that the best minds on the planet, not just the ones who have taken a security clearance oath, can actually get to work on it.
Why would you think at this point in time, just a guess, I know no one's going to know, but why the Pentagon would let this fly?
Why would they let it out?
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't. I guess my thinking is evolving continually on this. I think the way that they would let some part of it out is simply that there's an incontrovertible event. Okay? So a 2-mile hovering craft hovers over Chicago for 3 hours, and everybody and their mother takes a photo of it. the news crews get it, it's pretty hard to deny, then we're going to have to start talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the condition under which they would talk about it. I think under normal conditions, unless they have a slow plan that's picking up steam, and the New York Times, for example, is part of that, you're not going to see that kind of initial official disclosure. So what I think instead we have to look at is disclosure is us disclosing to ourselves. Your listeners, you and I, know certain facts that lead us to believe there is a solid reality to this thing. My neighbors don't think about it. My family isn't considering it, right? So what has to happen is the people who know things need to slowly acclimate the rest of us, okay? It isn't the government acclimating us. We need to acclimate the rest of the people. And technology has devolved into the hands of the individual in extraordinary ways these days. The chance that we can actually disclose this phenomenon to ourselves is stronger and stronger every single day.
Social
so when
media.
I reach out, I say to people, you want to bring about disclosure. If you want to petition the government, that's fine. I mean, that never hurts. But I would say find a few great UFO books that you think really make a strong case and buy extra copies of them and lend them to your friends and say, I'd like you to read this. And I'm not giving you this book. I want it back because I have other people I'm going to give it to. And instead of saying, the phrase I always use is, those of us who sort of know things are often treated like the drunk uncle at the wedding, right? So we need to get over that. We need to not say all the fringe stuff. We need to bring people in slowly and let them broaden themselves. So that's why I've worked very hard to come up with that statement about what can we say. We can say that at least some of the things flying around in our skies are from some place that isn't here, piloted by somebody that isn't us. That's pretty clear. Now, if you say that to your next door neighbor, he may be a little concerned about talking about UFOs, but that's not radical.
Yeah.
That's all that requires is saying, yeah, I guess that might be true. And that's where we start.
Yeah. Now, as far as the sightings and the percentage of people that actually report them, so low.
Yeah.
And so you just...
Well, who do they report it to?
I didn't know. I had my sighting in 2006.
Who'd
I
you
had no
report it
idea.
to?
I called the police department.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but nobody actually is officially collecting all those statistics. We used to have Blue Book.
Yeah.
You're supposed to call Blue Book, but that ended.
Now we have MUFON and New Fork.
Well, you could start with them.
Yeah, but I didn't even know they existed.
But they've been marginalized, right?
Yeah.
People go, well, they're just UFO kooks. So, the citizen who sees something anomalous doesn't really have a comfortable place to go.
Yeah.
And that needs to change.
Yeah. I mean, I actually have talked about this, but I actually was ridiculed by the dispatcher or whoever it was. Not ridiculed, just real sarcastic talking to me. Oh, yeah, really?
That's
that
pretty
type of thing.
unnecessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of those police departments do have either MUFON's number or New Fork's
Sure.
number.
And I think we have reason to believe that in multiple subtle ways we are moving down the field.
Yeah. I feel it. I feel it a little bit, and I have in my, official title as a professional fine arts and antiques.
Right.
It's a little tricky for me to, bring up the subject about UFOs, but I actually have with people that I've worked with, and they're more excited. I tell you, I've been doing this show for 6 years, and I have seen people a little more relaxed about it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the planets being found, Kepler.
Oh, for sure. Because I call it the Star Trek effect, okay? What would we do when we have space travel? We intend to, our image is we're going to get a giant spacecraft and we're going to go look around the universe.
Yeah.
Okay? So if we think that's acceptable for us, why wouldn't we think other intelligences would do it? Isn't it possible that all intelligent life is interesting to all other intelligent life?
Yeah.
And wouldn't that make a grand explanation for what's going on? And the thing that I think is going to go away fastest is the two-step dance that the people like Carl Sagan used to do and Neil deGrasse Tyson do now, which is, listen, people, the universe is teeming with life. There's billions and billions of planets, and we're discovering new planets all the time, but they couldn't be here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's not cutting it anymore.
Yeah.
When the New York Times article came out, I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson on CNN.
I saw him too.
And that man looked off his game. He had a number of snide remarks that he usually makes on the topic of UFOs, but that was when somebody had seen a light in the sky, and he would sort of do that. Now he was facing gun camera footage of experienced pilots who we trust to fly our nation's military aircraft.
You know,
talking about it.
You know what was the most shocking thing about that interview?
What's that?
Is when, I forget, was it Don Lemon? I can't remember. Said to him, I think he said to him something like, what do you think about the government spending $22 million? And he said, I think they should.
Yeah.
That shocked me, that he actually thought it was a good idea.
And, it's interesting. I actually thought he actually came to that conclusion during the interview. I saw his mind moving because at the very beginning, he was back. He has a... if you study Neil deGrasse Tyson interviews, he has 2 or 3 things when this topic gets raised that he uses as deflections, right? And I think he tried them, and he realized they sounded tone deaf to the news report that he was supposed to be reacting to.
Yeah.
And I think he tried to get on the right side of it. And frankly, he's such a bright guy, I'm pretty sure that if you hear him now, he's better. And by the way, when disclosure comes, the networks are all going to grab Neil deGrasse Tyson and put him on as if he's the expert, which is one of the things that frustrates me more than anything.
Just came out just an hour or 2 ago, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Seth Shostak discussing this. Just came out February 16th.
Okay.
On National Geographic, an article someone just sent me, and they're just going at it, how crazy the whole thing is.
They think UFOs are
if
crazy.
If an alien came here.
Oh.
That's kind of the title of it.
But Seth has been, Seth is the guy whose reputation should be in tatters when this is all over.
Absolutely. He won't have much of a career left.
I wish him no career, frankly. I don't want him having a career now, but after disclosure, I hope he is shunned instead of put on every other talk show.
Yeah. So anyway, that if you check out the news on February 16th, you will see that article came out on National Geographic, and I will quickly tell you the title of that, those who are listening, and it's How Would We React to Finding Aliens? That's it.
But see, again,
that's Finding Aliens.
They're hedging their bets.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to get a lovely message from space that proves aliens are real. Well, you know what? Great, I hope we do, but they're here now.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm sorry. We don't have to listen to them on a telescope. We should be aware that they're in our skies.
I love the fact that Bigelow came out and said
was
what he
great.
did. Yeah.
This guy's got balls. I really like that. Yeah, man. Go Bigelow.
Yeah, that's great.
Team Bigelow. I'm on that team.
Yeah. I would like to ask you a question. I'm not sure if you're following this at all. To the Stars Academy, have you looked into that at all?
Yeah.
Okay. So this, a longtime listener, all the way back from show number 5 or something, has asked me to ask this question, and that is, do you have any idea why the entertainment aspect is part of this?
I think it's a mistake, okay?
Yep.
I mean, I have strong feelings about it, and while I think Tom DeLonge seems like a sincere guy, and I don't wish to pick a fight, but I think that we all have to be part of this discussion, so I'll just offer my opinion here.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my take. I did something similar, saying we have to do it under the cover. We have to do disclosure under the cover of fiction on my Dark Skies television series. But I'm an entertainer now. Okay, I make television series and movies. That's what I do. I'm not saying that I know inside knowledge. If you have inside knowledge, and you think the best way to break it is through a television series or a book that's got a lot of fiction in it, I think that's the wrong idea. I say to Tom DeLonge, Tom, you seem like a great enough guy. I'd love to meet the guy. I think it'd be fantastic to spend some time talking to him. But the thing I'd most want to say to him and ask him about is, stop with this, I'm going to do this giant tease. If you know something, let it out.
Yeah.
Go on the record. Tell us. If you want to make a TV series after that, I'm not telling you shouldn't make money. But don't coat this TV series as saying it is the disclosure moment. No, it's still fiction until you say it's not.
Yeah.
So tell me what you know.
Yeah. I think I personally think it muddies the whole thing a bit.
It totally does.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Dark Skies was all about muddying the thing, but that was its concept, and it was a television series created by a couple of TV writers, me and Brent Friedman. That's different. We were not saying we have this inside knowledge and we're going to tell you what the truth is. Tom is saying that, and that, I think, asks that he be held to a higher standard.
Yeah. Very good. I appreciate you answering that. All right, let's hold up your book. Because,
yes, let's do that.
And up a little higher, and that's, of course, for the people on YouTube. Once There Was a Way. Let's talk about that. This is the show that I do once a month that we talk about other things other than UFOs, but I really enjoyed talking UFOs with you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So let
me just tell you a little bit about this book, because I have a multi-dimensional life. I don't do just UFO things. I have a lot of other interests. And I developed like that World War II movie that we're shooting, things like that. So I've got a lot of other stuff going on in my life. Among those things that I have going on is a book series called Breakpoint. The first book in the series was called Surrounded by Enemies, What If Kennedy Survived Dallas? These are novels.
I love that stuff. Yeah.
And it basically tells the story of what would have happened if Kennedy was shot at but missed. Well, what would have happened on November 23rd? He'd have been in the White House, and he and Bobby Kennedy would have gotten together and said, we know Oswald didn't do this alone. Who's after us, and how do we fight back? So Jack and Bobby in that book became the first conspiracy theorists. And it was so successful that it won the Sidewise Award for alternate history. And a publisher called Diversion Books came to me and said, we'd like you to do that again, and let's make a series out of it. So I thought, well, what's the most iconic thing? JFK is pretty freaking iconic. And I didn't want to do, what if the Civil War went differently? What if Nazis won world? I didn't want to do that. I wanted something that could articulate our cultural issues among a certain generation, a more modern generation. So Kennedy was a natural. He's the ultimate icon. But so are the Beatles. So I thought, I'm going to do the Beatles, which scared me at the time to say, I'm actually going to set forward and take a stab at what if the Beatles stayed together. But I found that to be endlessly fascinating, and Once There Was a Way actually tells, as if it's a Rolling Stone magazine kind of article looking back on the Beatles' success over the last 50 years. And it tells their story and focusing on what I call the years of maximum danger. We know the Beatles broke up in 69 and 70. They had issues, and by 70 it was all over, but it started really in 69 in a very strong way with Lennon. And I tried to ask myself, these books are not time travel books. They're not magic books. There's no portals or anything like that. They're just alternate history books that are meant to sound and be realistic. So I asked myself, what are the realistic ways that the Beatles might have overcome what were personal differences and professional differences and stayed together? Because the truth is, I'm sure you and your listeners have personal and professional differences with people, and you don't break up all the time. You work them out.
Yeah.
Many people do. So I really tried to create a world where this could happen, and boy, did it blow open into a great, fascinating world. So I focus on the years I call of maximum danger, where in our timeline they broke up in 1970. I focus on 70 through 75 and tell that story where these guys managed to keep their friendship still alive and the bonds that had kept them together strong enough to overcome what would still be very difficult, challenging times for them.
I wonder if there was any, I know they tried to get them back together.
Yeah.
That was a big goal. And there was just like no money that could do it, obviously.
No money couldn't do it. And I'm trying to find a way to enter that debate earlier. That was people after they were seriously broken up, trying to get them together for a one-off or whatever.
Yeah.
And those stories are well known to Beatles fans.
Yeah.
I just thought, I'm going to do something I've not read before. And quite often, when I've written screenplays on spec or books, it's the book I wanted to read, and I couldn't find it, so I wrote it. I did that with AD After Disclosure, certainly was Surrounded by Enemies, and now with Once There Was a Way. I just wanted to put one thing out because people always ask. We've built a pretty solid website to show people what this concept is all about. And it's very simple to remember. It's simply whatifbeatles.com.
Oh, that's
so you
great.
can remember What If Beatles, whatifbeatles.com. And for people that actually just want to, buy the ticket and take the ride, then they can get it on Amazon at amazonbeatles.com. Mm-hmm. And we've even done a video of the Beatles playing together in 1971 at George Harrison's house on a brand new Beatles song that we had made for this for marketing, and it's called morebeatles.com. So you got three: whatifbeatles.com, morebeatles.com, amazonbeatles.com. So, and by the way, I was pretty shocked that you can still buy a URL called amazonbeatles.com.
Yeah,
that was insane. So I was happy about that, and I've just enjoyed the process of talking to people about this. And you know what's so gratifying to me as an author is the comments on Amazon and on other locations have been so uniformly positive. And the thing that people seem to be responding to that really warms my heart, if you will, is that this is something we all kind of wished could have happened. Yeah. I mean, the Rolling Stones are still playing together.
Right.
Why couldn't the Beatles have been still playing together, right?
Yeah.
So people are responding by saying, it gave me a chance to spend a few hours in a world where they stayed together. And, we live in a world of Trump and dissension and everything. So here's a chance to think about the Beatles. And they just really found it interesting. Now, I will say this. This is not all champagne and roses.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they had to get through all their problems.
I mean, I'm a dramatist at heart. I don't write stories without conflict. Mm-hmm. And the Beatles story has lots of conflict. So what I've done with my drama is try to find some interesting, credible, realistic ways that they could have resolved their conflicts.
Now I know Yoko. I'm sorry. Yoko. Boy, I'm going to get bashed for that one.
Yoko, we all have brain farts like that once in a while.
Yeah. So Yoko was a part of it.
Right.
Well,
you've just raised the $64,000 question, though, because if you ask most people, they'd say Yoko Ono, broke up the Beatles. Now, Paul McCartney says that's not true, but most fans tend to lay that at Yoko's feet. So I knew that the most important thing this book had to do is treat the Yoko dissension in a credible way, and to find a way where not only could Yoko and John have found a way to modify slightly to keep things going, but the other Beatles could find a way to accept that John was not going to be part of any group that didn't have something to do with Yoko, right? Everybody had to give a little bit. It's sort of like when you make a deal in Hollywood right now, the idea is it's only a good deal if both parties hate it. And then you made a good deal, right? Mm-hmm. So I try to apply that a little bit to the Beatles that, nobody's happy. They're not, again, champagne and roses. No, that didn't happen in this book. Nobody's happy. Everybody is just seeing the larger issue. And without going on too much, and just give a couple of things that are not really spoilers to me, but people do not know that the Beatles almost starred in Lord of the Rings in the early 70s. And so in this book, for example, the Beatles actually star in The Lord of the Rings directed by Stanley Kubrick, something that almost happened. I'm not making this up. You can check it out. And McCartney has even told Peter Jackson the same. What I tried to look for were things like that, and other things where you could say certain things prevent you from announcing a breakup, right? Even the Beatles, when Lennon tried to get out in our timeline in the late '69, they said, "Please, we got other, we're making a deal with for different royalties. Can't you sit on this for a while?" So he did. Okay, so there's already precedent. So if you're making a movie, you need to publicize it. Well, it's certainly not going to be accepted by the studio that you're publicizing a movie while you're breaking up, right? So I tried to find little elements like that, and also that were fun. The Beatles did not play at Woodstock in our time frame, right? But they were invited. They were invited. They could have done it. They were busy recording Abbey Road. They could have practiced a few songs and got on a plane and gone to Woodstock. Well, they do in this book, and in fact, there's things that happen in the time stream as a consequence. Think about it.
Sure.
In this book, Once There Was a Way, the Beatles do play at Woodstock, but because it's so out of control,
it would have to be out of control.
They almost get killed.
Yeah.
By the crowd size, the surging crowd, and it comes close to killing them. Well, what does that do to them? It makes them say, we have to pay a lot more attention to security. If we're going to continue to show up at places, we have to pay some attention to this, right? And so what would that mean? Well, it would mean going forward that John Lennon, if he was living in the Dakota with Yoko, would not be signing autographs outside of it. He would know that he needs to pay attention. He would have had security driven into his brain, and instead of sitting out front signing autographs, he'd have driven his car into the garage.
Yeah.
Right? So I tried to deal with things like that where it's not outrageous to think that could happen. It doesn't involve some guy who came from the future, right? It's just how it could have gone down.
Right. So we'd have John Lennon today. Wouldn't that be a different world?
Well, he might still be dead by now of natural causes.
Sure.
What I did also with the book, and some fans get this, some don't, of course, but I tried to say things that were within the ability to change could change. But certain things like your physical illness stuff.
George Harrison.
George Harrison died because for the reasons that we know, right? Yeah. And I think it would be unlikely for me to change that. John Lennon was murdered. That can be changed.
Yeah.
All right. So and Linda McCartney died of cancer. That doesn't change just because I'm in an alternative universe, or it shouldn't change in my view. So I just tried to keep it grounded. Grounded is the word.
Now, before 1970, had Linda and Paul already met?
Oh, yeah.
So they were. So I can't remember.
In fact, this is one of the great things of all time that I've dealt with. I started the changing arrow of history in 1968 in this book. I didn't wait and do it at the 1970 break. I started it earlier. For example, you bring up Paul and Linda met each other much earlier, but they married in 1969, March of 69. And guess what? 1 week later, John and Yoko got married. All right? Now, here's the thing that'll blow your mind. None of the Beatles attended the other guy's wedding, okay? So John didn't go to Paul. Paul didn't go to John. I come up with a scenario in this book where they would find it important to go to each other's weddings.
Wow.
And, that can change a man.
Yeah.
If you're there with your best friend, even if you're having a hell of a fight with him, but you go to his wedding, you're going to feel differently about things. So, and here's... if we have time, the real quick storyline.
Sure.
The book starts in 1968. And in 1968, for real, in our time frame, Paul and John, even though they weren't getting along, got on a plane, flew to New York City to announce and promote Apple, their new company. Okay? So they get there, and they get booked on The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson's out of town, and they end up doing The Tonight Show, John and Paul, 1968, April. They end up doing The Tonight Show with Joe Garagiola as the host and Tallulah Bankhead as the drunken guest that night. Tallulah kind of heckled them, and Joe Garagiola was kind of clueless about anything Beatles, and they didn't have a good time. So it didn't really help in any way. Here's what happens in the book. Same thing, get on the plane, show up, but the first arrow of history diverts when they come to tell the Beatles in their hotel room, John and Paul, that guess what, Johnny Carson's not going to be here. You got a guest host tonight. And Lennon says, well, F that. I'm not coming. Mm-hmm. So they panic and they call Johnny Carson, who's actually doing a comedy show in New Jersey, not far away, and say the Beatles aren't going to show up unless you show up. And Carson says he's not happy about this. He doesn't like being dictated on his own show, but he does know a get when he gets one, which is John and Paul would be a really big deal for his show. So he agrees to come back on one condition, that they do the entire show and they sing a few songs. All right? And so what ends up happening is the Beatles have at least John and Paul have one of the world's best times together. Huh. And they end up going out drinking afterwards with Ed McMahon and Johnny Carson. Okay? So that's how a little tiny thing can just kind of expand outward and turn into a kind of a joyous experience.
Yeah.
And so I hope that some of your listeners will give the book a try. And I certainly tried to write it with respect for fans, but also for people that don't know much about the Beatles. And I'll close with this. The highest compliment I keep getting from it is people go, I had to keep stopping and checking, what really happened, because it all sounded so real that I didn't know what was true and what wasn't.
That is a compliment. Just one last question. You're right, we are at the end here. What type of friendships did they have before the problems happened? I mean, were they very close?
Oh yeah, I mean, think about it. In the late 50s, early 60s, before they became the worldwide phenomenon that they were, these guys were living together, and literally in some of their gigs, when they were in Germany, they had this tiny room that all four of them would share, and they'd have to sleep. Two of them would sleep in the same bed, head to toe, right? I mean, that's how close they were. Yeah. They did everything together, and they were inseparable friends, and they adored each other at that time. They were tough guys. They were wearing leather back then, and they were having a good time, but they were learning music, but they were with their bros. And so they always worked together. John and Paul, in particularly, were very close, and were close from the beginning. I mean, those guys were writing together from the beginning, and it wasn't really, and they stayed close. And even when they were fighting, they were still close, but with problems, as we all have with close friends from time to time. So they had every reason to be able to find a basis for friendship buried in the friendship that they'd had. Very few people in the world, in fact, nobody. Let's just say that. Nobody in the world had the experience that the Beatles had together. They got to the place where they had to hang with each other and support each other and have each other's back, because nobody else would, and nobody else was capable of understanding the experience that they were having.
That's right. There used to be an ad on the TV years ago that said, "There'll never be another group quite like the Beatles."
Oh, you know what? And probably back then some people heard it and said, "Yeah, right."
Yeah.
But guess what? It turned out to be true.
That's right. Your website one more time?
Okay. The main one is whatifbeatles.com. Yeah. And then if you want to see the video, it's morebeatles.com. And if you want to buy the book, it's amazonbeatles.com.
All right. Excellent. Thanks
Thank you. This has been so much fun. I just enjoyed it.
Same here.
All right.
Thank
bye-bye.
you. All right. That's it for the show. Thanks so much for listening. And we'll be back next week with two guests on at the same time, Derek Gilbert and Josh Peck. They've written a couple books. One is, the most recent one is called The Earth Stands Still, Old Gods Behind ETs and UFOs. It's going to be a great show. I just have a gut feeling about that. So we'll be back at the regular time. And if you support the show, thanks so much. Remember, anyone can do that. Just go to podcastufo.com. And that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.